The massive chamber stretched out like an ocean of light and shadow, filled with creatures from 1,000 different worlds. And at the center of it all stood one human woman who looked very small against the vastness of alien civilization ambassador. Elena Vasquez kept her hands steady at her sides as she walked toward the defendant's podium, her boots making soft sounds against the polished floor that seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over the assembly. She had prepared for this moment for 3 weeks. Ever since the summons had arrived at Earth's embassy with its golden seal and its formal language that barely hid the anger beneath the words. The Galactic Tribunal Chamber on Nexus Prime was the oldest court in known space, a place where wars had been ended and civilizations had been judged for over 40,000 years. And now humanity stood accused before its ancient power. Lena took her place at the podium and looked up at the thousands of alien faces that surrounded her, and rising tears that seemed to go up forever into the darkness. Above, some of them had skin like polished metal. Others had bodies made of flowing light. And still others looked like insects or plants or things that human minds had no words for. But they all shared one thing in common today. They all looked at her with disgust. High Arbiter Zoltharix sat at the highest point of the chamber, a being made entirely of living crystal, whose body caught the light and scattered it into rainbows across the walls. And when he spoke, his voice sounded like mountains grinding together. "This tribunal is now in session," he announced. And the words rolled through the chamber like thunder. "We are here to judge the species known as humanity for crimes committed during the Helix Nebula conflict against the Honorable Kethra Dominion." Elena felt thousands of eyes turn toward her with even greater intensity. And she kept her face perfectly calm, even as her heart beat faster in her chest. The Kethra delegation sat in a special section, reserved for the accusers. And they were terrifying to look at, with bodies like giant insects covered in armored plates and compound eyes that glittered with cold intelligence. Their war admiral, a massive creature named C.H. Cadle, rose from his seat and pointed one clawed limb at Elena. "The humans have violated the sacred codes of engagement," he declared, his mandibles clicking together to form words that the translation system rendered in a harsh mechanical voice. "They have fought without honor, without tradition, without any respect for the rules that have governed civilized warfare for 40 millennia." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, and Elena watched as delegates from dozens of species nodded their heads or made whatever gestures their bodies used to show approval. High Arbiter Zoltharix raised one crystalline hand for silence. "Read the charges," he commanded as smaller alien stepped forward with a glowing tablet and began to list the accusations against humanity in a voice that grew more horrified with each new crime. First charge: the human forces refused to announce their battle formations before engaging the Kethra fleet, denying the Dominion the right to prepare an appropriate response. The crowd murmured with shock. Second charge: the humans attacked supply vessels and fuel transports instead of engaging military ships in direct combat. The murmuring grew louder. Third charge: human ships used electronic interference to disable Kethra targeting systems, preventing honorable combat. Now there were actual shouts of anger from some sections of the chamber. Fourth charge: the humans deployed vessels with camouflage technology, hiding their true numbers and positions from the Kethra commanders. Elena remained still as a statue. Fifth charge: human forces attacked during rest cycles when Kethra crews were not prepared for battle. The reading continued, listing 17 separate violations of something called the Sacred Codes of Engagement. And with each new charge, the chamber grew more hostile. Elena had studied these sacred codes during her preparation, and she understood now what they represented. A set of rules that every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy had followed for thousands. Upon thousands of years, wars in this galaxy were fought like formal duels, with both sides announcing their intentions, lining up their ships in traditional formations, and engaging in direct combat where the stronger force would win. There was no ambush, no deception, no striking at weakness, only strength meeting strength in honorable battle. When the reading finished, High Arbiter Zoltherix turned his crystalline gaze upon Elena. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, and his voice was cold now, without any of the formal politeness it had held before. "You have heard the charges against your species, and the evidence has been reviewed by this tribunal. So I must ask you now, how does humanity plead?" The chamber fell completely silent, and Elena could feel the weight of galactic civilization pressing down upon her. All these ancient species who had built empires among the stars, while humans were still learning to make fire. She thought about the 3 weeks of war that had brought them here, about the Kethra ships that had appeared in human space with demands for tribute, about the colonies full of families who had been told to surrender or face destruction. She thought about what her people had done in response. "Honored Arbiter," Elena said, and her voice was steady and clear. "Humanity requests the right to present a full defense before this tribunal, and we ask that this defense be heard in open session tomorrow." Another wave of murmurs rolled through the chamber, because most species in her position would have begged for mercy or tried to make excuse where Admiral Keitao made a sound that the translator rendered as harsh laughter. "What defense can there be?" he demanded. "Your ships were recorded committing these violations. Your commanders gave the orders. And your species won a war through trickery and cowardice instead of honest combat." "Nevertheless," Elena replied calmly, "we claim our right to speak." High Arbiter Zoltherix considered this for a long moment, his crystalline body pulsing with inner light. "The right to defense is sacred to this tribunal," he finally said. "You will have your opportunity tomorrow, Ambassador. But I warn you that the evidence against your species is overwhelming, and the penalty for such violations is severe." Elena bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement. "We understand," she said, "and we are prepared." The session was closed, and the delegates began to file out of the chamber in small groups, many of them casting dark looks at the lone human who still stood at the defendant's podium. Elena gathered her materials slowly, giving herself time to observe the crowd, to note which species seemed most hostile and which seemed merely curious. The Kethra delegation was the last to leave besides her, and War Admiral Chetal made certain to pass close by her position. He towered over her, nearly 3 meters of armored chitin and predatory instinct, and his compound eyes reflected her face back at her in 1,000 tiny images. "Your species is young," he hissed, leaning down until his mandibles were close to her ear. "You have been among the stars for only a few decades, and you do not understand how things work here. But tomorrow you will learn." Elena looked up at him without any fear in her eyes. "Learn what?" she asked. "That there are rules to war," Chactal said. "Rules that every civilized species follows, rules that exist for good reason. And your people broke those rules like ignorant children playing with weapons they do not understand." He straightened up and clicked his mandibles in what might have been a gesture of contempt. "The tribunal will strip your colonies from you," he continued. "They will exile your species to your home system, and they will make an example of humanity so that no other young species ever makes the same mistake." Elena listened to all of this with a perfectly neutral expression, and then something changed in her face. It started at the corners of her mouth, a slight upward curve that slowly spread into something that the Kethra had never seen on a human. Before she was smiling, not a smile of fear or submission, not a nervous smile or a polite smile, but something else entirely. Something that made War Admiral Chetal take an involuntary step backward, even though he could have killed her with one blow of his armored limbs. "Thank you for the warning," Elena said softly, and her smile never wavered. "I will see you tomorrow, War Admiral." She walked past him toward the chamber exit, and Jad Tal watched her go with a strange feeling growing in his chest. A feeling that his species had not experienced in 6,000 years of undefeated warfare. He did not have a word for it, because the Kethra had forgotten what it meant to feel doubt. But as the human woman disappeared through the doorway, still wearing that mysterious smile, War Admiral Keital felt the first cold touch of something his ancestors would have recognized immediately. It was the beginning of fear. The embassy quarters were small compared to those of older species, just a few rooms in a forgotten corner of Nexus Prime. But tonight they buzzed with activity as Elena's team prepared for the most important presentation in human history. Commander James Okonkwo spread data tablets across the central table, his dark hands moving quickly as he organized thousands of files and images that they would need for tomorrow. While Dr. Sarah Chen worked at a holographic display in the corner, building the visual presentation that would accompany Elena's words. Elena herself stood at the window, looking out at the alien city that stretched below them. Towers of crystal and metal reaching up toward stars that humanity had only recently learned to visit. "They really have no idea," James said quietly, shaking his head as he scrolled through the sacred codes of engagement on his tablet. 40,000 years of warfare. And they turned it into something like a game with rules and referees. Sarah looked up from her work with a thoughtful expression. "It is not entirely stupid when you think about it," she said. "These species evolved past their aggressive instincts millions of years ago, and they created these codes to settle disputes without destroying each other completely. Evolved past their instincts," James repeated, and there was something dark in his voice. "Must be nice." Elena turned from the window and walked over to join them at the table, her face tired, but her eyes sharp with determination. "They did not just evolve past aggression," she said. "They forgot what it was like to fight for survival, to struggle against extinction, to face an enemy who wants to erase you from existence." She picked up one of the tablets and looked at the sacred codes displayed on its surface. "These rules assume that both sides want to survive," she continued. "They assume that war is just a way to settle arguments, not a fight to the death. And for 40,000 years that assumption has been correct." James leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "And then they met us," he said. "And then they met us." The room fell silent for a moment as all three of them considered what that meant. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 30 years ago, when a collective survey ship had discovered Earth and made first contact with a species that had just barely reached beyond its own solar system. At first, the aliens had been curious about humans, interested in this young species that had developed technology so quickly and spread to the stars with such enthusiasm, but curiosity had turned to concern as they learned more about human history. The other species in the galaxy had fought wars, of course, but their wars had been limited things. Formal conflicts governed by ancient rules that prevented total destruction. Human wars were different. Human wars were fought with poison gas and nuclear fire, with genocide and biological weapons, with sieges that starved entire cities and campaigns that burned whole nations to ash. The galactic community had watched recordings of human history with something between horror and fascination, unable to understand how a species could do such things to its own kind and still survive. And then the Kethra Dominion had declared war on human colonies. "Tell me again what happened," Elena said, settling into a chair across from James. "I want to make sure I have every detail correct for tomorrow." James nodded and pulled up a star map on the central display. 3 months ago, the Kethra sent formal notice to our colonies in the Helix Nebula. He began. "According to galactic law, They had the right to demand tribute from any species occupying territory they claimed. And if the tribute was refused, they had the right to declare war. Blue dots appeared on the map, showing human colony worlds, and red dots appeared nearby showing the Kethra positions. Our colonies had 50,000 civilians, James continued. Families, children, people who had spent years building new homes among the stars. And the Kethra wanted them to pay half of everything they produced or face military action. We refused. Elena said, we refused. And the Kethra declared declarable war according to the sacred codes, which meant they sent us their battle plan in advance, told us exactly where and when they would attack, and expected us to meet them with our own fleet in traditional formation. Sarah made a sound that was almost a laugh. They actually sent us their attack plan, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Every ship position, every movement, everything we would need to know to defeat them. James nodded grimly. That is how war works in this galaxy. Both sides share their plans. They meet at an agreed location, and the stronger force wins while the weaker force retreats in good order. But we did not follow the plan, Elena said. No, we did not. James pulled up new images on the display. Recordings from human ships during the 3 weeks of conflict that followed. Our admirals looked at the Kethra battle plan and saw an enemy that expected us to fight by their rules, he said. They saw supply lines without escorts because attacking supplies was against the sacred codes. They saw communication relays left undefended because jamming was considered dishonorable. They saw ships arranged in perfect formation with no scouts or patrols because ambush was forbidden. The images showed human ships doing terrible things by galactic standards, strike teams, hitting fuel transports in the middle of the night cycle, electronic warfare vessels filling Kethra sensors with false signals, camouflage destroyers appearing out of nowhere to attack command ships and then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. We did not fight their war, James said quietly. We fought our war, the kind of war humans have been perfecting for 10,000 years. Elena watched the recordings with a distant look in her eyes. How long did it take? She asked, even though she already knew the answer. 3 weeks. The most powerful military in this sector of the galaxy. A species that had not lost a war in 6,000 years. And we broke them in 3 weeks. The room fell silent again. Sarah was the first to speak. They are going to ask us why, she said. Tomorrow in that chamber. They are going to demand to know why we fought like this when we could have followed the rules. Elena stood up and walked back to the window. Because following the rules would have meant losing, she said. The Kethra fleet was 3 times the size of ours, with better ships and more experienced crews. And if we had met them in traditional formation, they would have destroyed us. She turned to face her team, and then they would have taken our colonies, our families, our children. And they would have considered it a fair and honorable victory, according to their precious sacred codes. Her hands tightened into fists at her sides. We did not come to the stars to kneel before anyone. We did not build those colonies just to give them away. And we did not sacrifice generations of human struggle just to lose because some alien rulebook told us we had to fight fair. James and Sarah exchanged glances, seeing the fire in their ambassador's eyes. So what is our defense? James asked. Because right now it sounds like we are just going to admit everything and hope they understand. Elena's expression changed. That same mysterious smile appearing on her face that had so disturbed War Admiral Katal. We are going to do something better, she said. We are going to tell them the truth. She walked over to the central display and began pulling up files, documents, images, and recordings that her team had gathered over the past 3 weeks. We are going to show them what humanity really is, Elena continued. Not the young species they think they understand. Not the newcomers who do not know the rules. But what we actually are, She spread her hands across the display, and images of human history began to appear: soldiers in trenches, cities in flames, weapons of terrible destruction, and also something else: humans rebuilding after disasters. Humans protecting each other against impossible odds. Humans refusing to surrender, even when all hope seemed lost. We are going to remind them of something they forgot a long time ago, Elena said. Something that every species in this galaxy used to know, before they evolved past their instincts and turned war into a polite game. James leaned forward with interest. What is that? He asked Elena Metis, eyes with absolute certainty in her gaze. That survival is not about honor or tradition or following rules. Survival is about doing whatever it takes to see another sunrise. And no species in this galaxy understands that better than humanity. She turned back to the window and looked out at the stars. Tomorrow we are going to scare them, she said softly. Not with threats or weapons, but with the truth about what we are and what we are capable of doing. Sarah stood up from her workstation. And what about the legal defense? She asked. They will still say we broke their laws. Elena's smile widened. Leave that to me, she said. I found something in their sacred codes that they seem to have forgotten. Something that changes everything. She would not say more than that, no matter how much her team pressed her. But when they finally went to their beds in the early hours of the morning, each of them carried a small spark of hope that had not been there before, whatever Elena had planned. She seemed completely confident that it would work, and somewhere in the diplomatic quarters of the Kethra delegation, War Admiral Keitel lay awake in the darkness, unable to forget the smile on the human woman's face or shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. He told himself it was nothing, that humans were young and weak and did not understand how the galaxy worked, that tomorrow the tribunal would crush them and restore proper order. But deep in the ancient parts of his brain, the parts that his species had not used in thousands of asterisks, the tribunal chamber was packed beyond capacity when Elena Vasquez walked to the defendant's podium on the second day, with delegates crowding the aisles and holographic screens extending the chamber virtually to accommodate species who could not attend in person. Word had spread through Nexus Prime overnight that the humans intended to mount a real defense, rather than simply begging for mercy. And the entire galaxy had tuned in to watch what everyone expected to be either a spectacular failure or an entertaining display of human arrogance. Elena took her place and looked up at the assembled masses without any trace of fear on her face. High Arbiter Zoltharix called the session to order with his grinding crystal voice. Ambassador Vasquez, you have requested the opportunity to present a defense against the charges leveled at your species, and this tribunal has granted that request according to ancient tradition. He leaned forward on his elevated seat, rainbows of light scattering from his body across the chamber walls. You may begin, he said. Elena bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement and then turned to face the crowd. Honored Arbiter, respected delegates of the Galactic Assembly, I thank you for the opportunity to speak before this tribunal, she began, her voice clear and steady. Before I present my defense, I must first ask a question that I hope you will consider carefully. She paused, letting the silence stretch out across the chamber. What is the purpose of war? She asked. Murmurs rippled through the crowd at this unexpected opening. And High Arbiter Zoltharix made a sound like crystals grinding together that the translator rendered as confusion. The purpose is well established, he replied. War exists to resolve disputes between species through honorable combat, according to the principles set forth in the sacred codes of engagement. Elena nodded as if this was exactly the answer she expected. To resolve disputes, she repeated. To determine a winner and a loser, to end conflicts that cannot be settled through diplomacy. And I would add one more purpose that perhaps you have forgotten. She looked directly at the High Arbiter. War exists to ensure survival, she said, when all other options have failed. War is the last resort of a species fighting to protect its people from extinction. War Admiral Cato shifted in his seat and clicked his mandibles with irritation. This is philosophy, not defense, he called out. We are not here to discuss the nature of war. We are here to judge whether the humans violated the sacred codes. With respect to the War Admiral, Elena replied calmly, I believe this philosophy is essential to understanding why humanity fought the way we did. She raised her hand and activated the holographic display system, and images began to appear in the air above the chamber. They were not images of the recent war. They were images of Earth. The first images showed soldiers in muddy trenches, their faces hollow with exhaustion, surrounded by barbed wire and the bodies of their fallen companions while explosions lit up the sky above them. This is what humans call the First World War, Elena explained. A conflict that took place on our home planet over 100 years ago. Before we had even left our own atmosphere, the numbers appeared beside the images. 17 million dead, 20 million wounded. Entire nations devastated by a war that had accomplished almost nothing. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. The images changed, showing something even worse. Cities reduced to rubble, massive bombs falling from aircraft, and then a terrible mushroom cloud rising over a flattened landscape. This is the Second World War, Elena continued. 70 to 85 million dead, including the deliberate murder of millions of civilians in death camps designed for mass extermination. Delegates in the chamber began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The images continued. Burning villages, mass graves, children with hollow eyes staring at the camera, weapons of terrible destruction, cities consumed by fire. This is what war means to humanity, Elena said, her voice growing harder. Not a formal duel between gentlemen, not a polite game with rules and referees, but a struggle for survival where everything is permitted because the alternative is extinction. She swept her hand across the display and new images appeared. Guerrilla fighters hiding in jungles, resistance movements striking from shadows, spies and saboteurs working behind enemy lines. We learned very early in our history that honor is a luxury of the powerful, Elena continued. When you are weaker than your enemy, when your people face destruction, when everything you love is about to be swept away, you do not fight fair. She turned to face the Kethra delegation directly. You fight to win. The chamber had fallen completely silent now. Thousands of alien faces watching the human woman with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. Your sacred codes are beautiful, Elena said. Turning back to the full assembly, they are noble and civilized and represent the highest ideals of galactic society. And they work because all of you evolved past your predator instincts. Millions of years ago, she paused, but humanity did not evolve past those instincts. We refined them. We spent 10,000 years learning every possible way to kill each other. And then we spent another 10,000 years getting better at it. She pulled up more images. Ancient warriors charging into battle. Siege weapons breaking down castle walls. Revolutionary armies fighting against empires. Desperate defenders refusing to surrender, even when all hope was lost. Every child on Earth grows up learning about these wars, Elena explained. Every human carries this history in their blood. This knowledge that sometimes survival means doing terrible things. Sometimes there is no honorable choice. Sometimes you must fight dirty or watch everyone you love die. War Admiral Chaital rose from his seat, his compound eyes blazing with anger. You speak of this history as if it excuses your crimes, he shouted. But it only proves that humans are savages who do not deserve a place among civilized species. Elena met his gaze without flinching. I speak of this history because you need to understand something. War Admiral, she replied. When you declared war on our colonies, you expected us to line up our ships and fight according to your rules. You expected a formal battle that your superior forces would easily win. She took a step toward him, but we looked at your declaration and we saw something different. We saw a threat to our families, our children, our future as a species. And every instinct in our blood told us to respond the only way. Humans know how to respond to existential threats. Her voice dropped lower, and somehow it carried even more clearly through the silent chamber. We fought to survive. The images on the display changed again, showing the recent war. Human ships striking from darkness, supply lines burning, Kethra formations thrown into chaos by enemies they could not see or predict. We did not hide our ships because we wanted to break your sacred rules, Elena said. We hid them because hiding is how the weak survive against the strong. We struck your supplies because hungry soldiers cannot fight. We attacked during your rest cycles because tired enemies make mistakes. She spread her hands. We used every trick and tactic that humanity has developed over thousands of years of brutal warfare. And we did it because our people were depending on us to bring them home safely. She turned back to face the High Arbiter. I do not ask this tribunal to approve of what we did, she said. I do not expect you to admire human methods of warfare. And I understand that many of you are horrified by what you have seen today. Her expression softened slightly, but I ask you to understand why we did it. We are not savages who enjoy destruction. We are not monsters who seek suffering. We are simply a species that has learned through terrible experience that survival sometimes requires sacrifice of honor. She bowed her head. We fought the only way we knew how, and I am not ashamed of that. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after she finished. Speaking High Arbiter Zoltherix, crystalline body pulsed with complex patterns of light as he considered her words. Ambassador Vasquez, he finally said, your explanation is illuminating, and I believe this tribunal now understands humanity's perspective more fully than before. He paused. However, understanding motivation does not excuse violation of law. The sacred codes exist for good reason. And if we allowed every species to ignore them based on claims of necessity, galactic civilization would collapse into chaos. Elena nodded as if she had expected this response. You are absolutely correct, Honored Arbiter, she said, which is why I have not yet presented the legal foundation of my defense. A new ripple of murmurs went through the chamber, and Jastol's mandibles clicked with surprise. There is more, he demanded. Elena's smile returned. That same mysterious expression that had haunted the War Admiral's sleep. There is much more, she said. Everything I have shown you so far was simply context. Background to help you understand the species you are judging. She raised her hand over the holographic controls. Now, with your permission, I would like to present the actual defense. The chamber buzzed with anticipation as delegates leaned forward in their seats, suddenly aware that this strange human woman had been leading them somewhere specific. All along, High Arbiter Zoltherix gestured for her to continue, and Elena Vasquez began to smile even wider. The trap was about to close. Elena's fingers danced across the holographic controls, and the images of human warfare disappeared from the display, replaced by something far less dramatic. A simple document filled with dense legal text. Honored delegates, she began. I would like to direct your attention to the sacred codes of engagement, specifically to the founding document that established these rules 40,000 years ago. The document expanded until its words were visible throughout the chamber. Ancient text in a language that predated most of the species present. Article 1, Section 1, Elena read aloud. All species party to these codes agree to conduct warfare according to the principles herein established, and to accept the judgment of the Galactic Tribunal in matters of dispute. She looked up at the assembly. This is the foundation of your entire system of civilized warfare. The agreement that makes the sacred codes binding on all who sign them. War Admiral Jacktal rose impatiently from his seat. We know what the codes say, he snapped. We have lived by them for 6,000 years. And we did not come here for a history lesson. Patience, War Admiral? Elena replied calmly. I am getting to the point. She scrolled through the document to another section. Article 7. Section 3. Violations of these codes shall be investigated by the Galactic Tribunal, and penalties shall be assigned according to the severity of the offense and the damage caused to affected parties. She paused and looked directly at the Kethra delegation. This is the article under which humanity has been accused, the legal basis for this entire tribunal. And I do not dispute that our actions would constitute violations if this article applied to us. The chamber stirred with confusion at her words. If this article applied to you. High Arbiter Zoltherix repeated, his crystal voice sharp with sudden interest. What do you mean by that? Elena's smile widened. I mean, honored Arbiter. That before we can determine whether humanity violated the sacred codes, we must first establish whether humanity is bound by them at all. She scrolled back through the document to the very first section and highlighted a specific passage, Article 1, Section 4. She read, her voice ringing clear through the suddenly silent chamber. These codes shall apply only to species that have formally ratified the treaty, and non-signatory species are not bound by its provisions. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Earth has never signed the sacred codes of engagement, Elena said simply. We have never ratified this treaty, never agreed to be bound by its rules, and never accepted the jurisdiction of this tribunal over our conduct of warfare. Chaos erupted. Delegates shouted in 100 different languages, their voices overlapping into a roar of confusion and outrage, while the Kethra delegation surged to their feet with their mandibles clicking furiously. High Arbiter Zoltherix raised both crystalline hands and called for order, his voice booming through the chamber until the noise finally subsided. Ambassador Vasquez, he said carefully, you are claiming that humanity is not subject to the sacred codes. I am not claiming it, honored Arbiter. I am stating a fact that can be easily verified. She pulled up another document on the display, this one showing Earth's admission agreement to the Galactic Union. When humanity joined Galactic Society 30 years ago, we signed the Charter of Peaceful Association, which grants us the rights and responsibilities of Union membership, Elena explained. But the Charter and the Sacred Codes are separate treaties, and signing one does not automatically commit a species to the other. She turned to face the chamber. Many of you signed both treaties at the same time, because you had already been following the Sacred Codes for millennia. But there is no requirement to do so, and humanity never did. War Admiral Katal pushed forward through his delegation, his armored body trembling with rage. This is a trick, he shouted. A manipulation of technicalities that insults everything the sacred codes represent. It is not a trick, Elena replied evenly. It is simply the law, the same law that you invoked when you accused us of violations. The same law that governs this tribunal. She met his compound eyes without fear. We read your sacred codes very carefully. War Admiral, we studied every article and every section and every footnote, and we found that they did not apply to us. Her voice dropped slightly. That is also how humans fight. Cal stood frozen, his mandibles working silently as he tried to process what had just happened. High Arbiter Zoltherix's crystalline form pulsed with rapid patterns of light as he consulted with other members of the tribunal, and the chamber buzzed with frantic discussions as delegates tried to understand the implications of Elena's revelation. Finally, the Arbiter raised his hands again. The tribunal will verify this claim, he announced. Legal scholars, confirm whether Earth has signed the sacred codes of engagement. A few minutes passed as robed figures in aside Gallery consulted ancient records, and then one of them stepped forward with a grave expression. "The ambassador's claim is accurate," the scholar reported, his voice heavy with reluctance. Earth was invited to ratify the sacred codes upon joining the Union, but no ratification was ever completed, and there is no record of human agreement to be bound by its provisions. The chamber fell silent. According to Article 1, Section 4, the scholar continued, a non-signatory species cannot be held in violation of the codes, regardless of their conduct. Elena stood perfectly still at the podium, watching as the reality of her defense sank in across thousands of alien faces. War Admiral Chactal found his voice again. "This cannot be," he said. And for the first time, his voice held something other than anger. Something that sounded almost like desperation. The sacred codes have governed warfare for 40 millennia. Every civilized species follows them. Every honorable power respects them. He turned to the High Arbiter. You cannot allow humanity to escape justice on a technicality. You cannot let them make a mockery of everything we believe in. Elena spoke before the Arbiter could respond. "We are not mocking your beliefs, War Admiral," she said, and her voice had lost its edge, becoming something softer, almost sympathetic. "We understand why the sacred codes exist, and we respect the peace they have maintained across the galaxy." She walked toward the Kethra delegation, and Chactal took an involuntary step backward. "But you declared war on human colonies," Elena continued. "You threatened our families with destruction if we did not surrender half of everything they had worked to build. And you expected us to face your overwhelming forces in a battle we could not win." She stopped a few meters from the War Admiral. "What would you have us do? Lie down and accept defeat because your rules said we should? Let our people be conquered because your traditions demanded fair play?" Chactal's compound eyes reflected her face back at her in 1,000 tiny images. "The honorable thing would have been to accept your weakness," he said. But his voice had lost its certainty. "Honor," Elena repeated. And there was something ancient in her eyes now. Something inherited from countless generations who had fought impossible battles against impossible odds. "Honor is a beautiful thing, War Admiral. But it does not protect children from invading armies. It does not feed families whose homes have been destroyed. It does not bring back the dead." She turned back to face the full assembly. Humanity has learned through 10,000 years of bitter experience that survival matters more than honor. That protecting your people matters more than following rules. And that sometimes the only victory is the one you are still alive to celebrate. The chamber was completely silent now. Thousands of delegates watching the lone human woman with expressions of awe and fear and something else that many of them had not felt in a very long time, understanding. "We did not know your rules," Elena said softly, "and even if we had known them, we would not have followed them because our people were depending on us to save them, and we would have done anything necessary to bring them home." She looked up at High Arbiter Zoltherix. "That is my defense. Honored Arbiter, we cannot have violated laws we never agreed to follow. And I ask this tribunal to dismiss the charges against humanity." The Arbiter was silent for a long moment, his crystalline body dark and still. "The law is clear," he finally said, and each word sounded like it was being dragged from somewhere deep inside him. Article 1, Section 4 applies. And non-signatory species cannot be held in violation of the sacred codes. He raised his hands in a formal gesture. "The charges against humanity are dismissed. This tribunal has no jurisdiction over Earth's conduct of warfare." The words echoed through the chamber, and Elena Vasquez felt 30 years of fear and uncertainty lift from her shoulders. They had won, but as she looked around at the stunned faces of the Galactic Assembly, she knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had announced itself to the universe in a way that could never be taken back, and nothing would ever be the same again. The chamber emptied slowly after the verdict. delegates filing out in small groups while casting uncertain glances at the human woman, who still stood at the defendant's podium. Elena watched them go with a calm expression, knowing that conversations were happening right now in 1,000 different languages on 1,000 different worlds. As the news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy, Commander James Okonkwo and Dr. Sarah Chun waited for her near the exit, their faces showing a mixture of relief and exhaustion. But Elena held up one hand to indicate she needed a moment longer. High Arbiter Zolthurix descended from his elevated seat, his crystalline body catching the chamber lights and scattering them across the walls. As he moved, he stopped a few meters from Elena and regarded her with eyes that had seen 40,000 years of galactic history. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, and his voice was quieter now, more personal. "A word before you leave." Elena nodded and waited. "You have won your case," Zolthurix continued. "The law was clear, and this tribunal had no choice but to rule in your favor." But Elena prompted, sensing there was more. Arbiter's body pulsed with complex patterns of light that the translation system could not quite interpret. "But you must understand what you have done today," he said. "For 40,000 years, the sacred codes have prevented total war between civilizations. They have saved countless billions of lives. And they exist because we learned long ago what happens when warfare has no limits." He moved closer, and Elena could feel the strange energy that emanated from his crystalline form. "Your species has reminded the galaxy of something we thought we had evolved beyond," Zolthurix said. "You have shown us that war can be brutal and unpredictable and without mercy, and that knowledge cannot be unlearned." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "We did not introduce anything new, Honored Arbiter," she replied. "We simply showed you what you had forgotten." She gestured toward the now empty seats where thousands of delegates had sat. "Every species in this union has predator ancestors," she continued. "Every civilization here clawed its way to the stars through struggle and conflict. And you created the sacred codes because you remembered what unrestricted warfare could do." She paused. "But you did not eliminate the capacity for such warfare. You simply chose to suppress it. And today, we reminded you that the choice can be made differently." Zolthurix was silent for a moment. "You are more dangerous than you appear," he finally said. "Your species, I mean, not just you personally, though you are formidable in your own right." Elena allowed herself a small smile. "We know what we are," she said. "We have never had any illusions about the darkness in human nature. And we have spent our entire history trying to balance that darkness against the light." She stepped toward the Arbiter. "Humanity does not want to be the galaxy's enemy," she said earnestly. "We do not enjoy the kind of warfare our history has taught us. And we would prefer to live in peace with all species." "Then why?" Zolthurix asked. "Why show us what you are capable of? Why reveal the predator behind the mask?" Elena's expression hardened. "Because the Kethra gave us no choice," she said. "They declared war on our civilians. They threatened our families with slavery and destruction. And they expected us to roll over and accept defeat because their rules said we should." Her voice dropped. "We needed the galaxy to understand that humanity will not be bullied. We will not be conquered, and we will not fight fair when the survival of our people is at stake." She turned and began walking toward the exit where her team waited. "So here is humanity's message to the stars," she called back over her shoulder. "We will sign your sacred codes. We will fight with honor when honor is offered to us. We will be the best allies and partners that any species could ask for." She stopped and looked back at the Arbiter. "But if anyone threatens our people again, they should remember what we showed here today. They should remember that humans have 10,000 years of experience in dirty warfare. And they should ask themselves if conquest is really worth the cost." Her smile returned, sharp and knowing, "because we will not stop at defeating them. We will break them so completely that no one ever tries again." The chamber fell silent as Elena rejoined her team and walked out through the massive doors. War Admiral Chactaw was waiting in the corridor outside. Standing alone while the rest of his delegation had already departed, Elena stopped when she saw him. And for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other. The Kethra warrior was still massive and armored and terrifying. But something had changed in his compound eyes. Something that had not been there before the tribunal began. "Ambassador," he said, and his voice was quiet, almost respectful. "War Admiral." Elena replied. Catel's mandibles clicked softly. "My species has not lost a war in 6,000 years, he said. "We have been the most feared military power in this sector of the galaxy, and we believed ourselves to be the ultimate warriors." He paused. "But today, I learned that we have been fighting with one hand tied behind our backs, following rules that our enemies never agreed to, assuming that everyone would play by the same traditions." Elena waited. "Your people terrify me," Chactaw admitted. "And the words seemed to cost him something, not because you defeated us, but because I now understand that you were holding back, that you could have done so much worse if you had wanted to." "We only wanted to protect our colonies," Elena said. "We took no pleasure in the destruction we caused." "I believe you," Chal replied. "And that is perhaps the most frightening thing of all, because it means you are not monsters. You are simply survivors who will do whatever is necessary to continue surviving." He straightened to his full height. "My government will not seek revenge for our defeat," he said formally. "The Kethra Dominion recognizes that we initiated hostilities and suffered the consequences, and we will not make the mistake of threatening human territory again." Elena bowed her head slightly. "Humanity appreciates the Dominion's wisdom," she replied with equal formality. "And we hope that in time, our species can build a more peaceful relationship." Chactaw made a sound that the translator rendered as bitter laughter. "Peace with humans," he said. "I never thought I would live to see the day when the Kethra sought peace, because we were afraid to fight." He turned and began to walk away, then paused. "Your species will go far," he said without looking back. "Perhaps farther than any of us can imagine. But I wonder if the galaxy will still be standing when you get there." He continued walking, his armored footsteps echoing through the corridor until he disappeared around a corner. James stepped up beside Elena. "That sounded almost like a compliment," he said. "It was," Elena replied quietly. In his own way, he was acknowledging that humanity has joined the ranks of powers that cannot be ignored. She turned and began walking toward the embassy quarters, her team falling into step beside her. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Elena considered the question as they walked. "Now we sign the sacred codes," she said. "We become part of the galactic system. We follow the rules that everyone else follows." She paused. "But we make sure that everyone remembers what happens if they try to fight us without honor first." 6 months later, Earth formally ratified the sacred codes of engagement in a ceremony broadcast across every world in the Galactic Union. Ambassador Vasquez signed the document personally, surrounded by delegates from hundreds of species who watched with a mixture of relief and apprehension. But before she signed, humanity insisted on one small addition to the ancient treaty, Article 47. Section 12, forever after known as the Human Closet, reads simply: "Any species that initiates hostilities against civilian populations or non-military targets forfeits the protections of these codes." Regarding the defending party's response, the provision passed unanimously, with every species voting in favor, because every species remembered what had happened to the Kethra Dominion, and none of them wanted to find out what humans would do without any rules at all in the years that followed. Humanity became one of the most respected members of galactic civilization, known for their creativity and adaptability and fierce loyalty to their allies. They fought in several wars, always following the sacred codes, always conducting themselves with honor and restraint. And no one ever attacked a human colony again, because deep in the memory of every species was the image of Ambassador Elena Vasquez standing alone against the judgment of the entire galaxy, smiling that mysterious smile and reminding them all of a simple truth: humans do not fight to show off their honor, humans fight to win, and anyone who forgot that lesson did not deserve the mercy that the sacred codes were designed to provide. The galaxy had gained a new partner, a new ally, a new voice in the great conversation of civilizations spanning the stars, but it had also gained something else: a reminder that the universe was still wild and dangerous and full of surprises, and that somewhere in the darkness between the stars, there was a species that had never forgotten what it meant to be a predator. Humanity had announced itself to the cosmos, and the cosmos had learned to be careful. This was not a threat, and it was not a boast. It was simply the truth, and in the end, that was enough.